For our next session, I'd like to introduce Megan Howson, who is our GCOOS Marine Mammal Biologist. She's going to help lead and moderate the Marine Life project session. Just a reminder, these are 10-minute presentations, and there will be time for questions at the end of all the presentations for the presenters. And with that, take it away, Megan. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. All right, presenting on Cetacean, or the Compilation of Environmental Threat and Animal Data for Cetacean Population Health Analyses platform, a little bit of a mouthful. Jerad King, our GIS manager and developer, is also going to be doing this presentation with me. And we're going to focus on the GCOOS portion of this. We do have partners both with NOAA and AOML working on this project with us. And Dr. Jorge Brenner, Philemon Gallanillo, myself, Jerad King, and Grant Craig are the GCOOS team members working on this project. Some of the overarching project objectives is we are trying to create a centralized data repository for cetacean data. A lot of this data is held in a variety of different places, and it's not always easy to find or access. So we are trying to increase access to this data, increase searchability, as well as provide some analytical products and some easier visualization tools for end users to access. We are also providing a data pipeline to the AOML team, who will be developing a web application for this project, and it's funded by the Deepwater Horizon Open Ocean Trustee Implementation Group. Some of the different data types that we are focusing on including, we're not limiting ourselves in any way, but our priority data are population data, including federal data, specifically the GOMAP surveys, movement data, some different tags that we are trying to obtain, as well as species distribution models. This project is divided into a build 1 and build 2, so that we are always meeting end users' needs instead of having them wait for the entire project to be complete. We are focusing on the build 1 right now, looking at stressor data, so things like vessel traffic, anthropogenic noise, fishing effort, as well as offshore wind lease sales. And then we'll move into build 2, which is more focused on environmental data. When we were developing this repository, it's hosted as an Esri hub. We wanted to ensure that data was really easy to find and access. So users can search data if they know for the specific data set they want. There's a search bar that they can type it in, and that will direct them to that data set. Or if they just want to browse different types of data that are available, we have it grouped by categories, so population data, threat data, environmental data, as well as some ancillary data sets such as different boundaries that might be useful to end users. Or they could explore the data by collection, so some of the major research projects such as GOMAPs that we're hosting their data, they can search it by that. And then Jerad, if you want to present more on the GIS portion of this project.
Sure. All right. Thank you, Megan. So I'm Jerad King, the GCOOS GIS Manager and developer. So I'd like to start off with talking about a little bit of Cetacean as its own GIS, Cetacean as a system, and why it's more than just a hub page. How we leverage ArcGIS Online infrastructure to maximize points of access for data sets to accommodate a diverse user base. I'd also like to talk about what supporting projects are in development and what the next steps are for us with the Cetacean project. So as I mentioned, Cetacean, its data, applications, and all services currently operate within the ArcGIS Online ecosystem. Now, there's a lot of benefits to that, but going back to the core project objective of accessibility with data, that is a huge benefit for hosting on the ArcGIS Online platform is accessibility. So this data living in a hub site can be seamlessly integrated into other Esri cloud-based and local applications. So in this instance, we are accessing the Cetacean data repository in the catalog pane in ArcGIS Pro, which you might be familiar with. And then we can search the data within that catalog pane and add it to our map and conduct our analysis. So in this case, this was, I believe, monthly AIS data that was added to a species distribution model. Now, this data set in particular, I think, is a couple gigabytes in size, so you might not want that loading within your browser. But these are design elements that we purposefully chose to make sure that users could access and use the data in whatever format they so chose. And then if we could move on to the next slide, please. So in thinking about trying to take advantage of the ArcGIS Online capabilities to ensure Cetacean is a good experience, we'll talk about some of the supporting applications that are being co-developed with that platform. Now, the first one, ERDAP to ArcGIS Online, I will be giving a lightning talk on this in a few minutes, so I will kind of save some of the additional details there. But essentially what this tool is it's a Python package that will enable near real-time ERDAP environmental data to be added to the Cetacean hub site. And this will enable others with ERDAP services to clone their own data repositories to ArcGIS Online. And so this came out of a need for environmental data for the Cetacean project. A glaring option, since we are an ocean observing system, was to use our own environmental data, of course. But since we were hosting Cetacean on ArcGIS Online, we realized there was no standard workflow for transferring data between the two platforms. So that's where ERDAP to ArcGIS Online came about. And then we also have the Cetacean Data Atlas that we're working on, which is a web application designed to enhance a user's ability to choose and find data. So really, this is just an alternative but interactive browsing option for users to access and visualize data in batch. And next slide, please. So this is just an example of how easy it can be to add ERDAP data to ArcGIS Online. So it's really just a two-step process. This is a little bit of an older version of the program, but now you can actually access 53 different total ERDAP servers and access that data on ArcGIS Online. So here we're taking station CBI 130, and then we're simply plotting seawater salinity with the native built-in ArcGIS Online tools. So we're really excited about how this data is going to bolster the ability of researchers to study cetaceans in the Gulf of Mexico. The next slide, please. And then we have an example of the Cetacean Data Atlas, where on the right-hand side, you can see we have a number of layers. These are all the layers contained within the Cetacean data repository. You can add multiple layers onto the map to see how they interact, what their spatial relationships are, and then download all those layers all at once to allow for easy analysis. The next slide. So in thinking about the next steps for Cetacean, we're going to continue to process and populate the hub with threat data. Development will continue with ERDAP to ArcGIS Online and the Cetacean Data Atlas. We're also working closely with Esri to learn how we can enhance GIS for the ocean. And with that will come a threads workflow for creating model data into the hub, not just our observed sensor data. And we're also looking for feedback from users. Cetacean is intended to be a one-stop shop for your studies or research. So we really encourage you now to try the website, think of a study. If the data that you're looking for is there, fantastic. If not, let us know, and we'd love to add that. So with that on Cetacean, I'm going to wrap this up and pass it back to Megan to talk a little bit about Sea Turtle Atlas, which is a similar project that is starting up.
Thanks, Jared. We wanted to give you a brief update or introduction to the Sea Turtle Atlas as well, since it is a sister marine life project for GCOOS. We did just begin this project in September, very recently, so we don't have any major updates to give you. But as a little bit of background, it is also funded by the Deepwater Horizon Open Ocean Trustee Implementation Group. And have a couple more concrete aims with this. So we are looking at to develop a comprehensive understanding of leatherback habitat use, as well as understanding loggerhead, green, and Kemp's Ridley movements, specifically in the Louisiana coastal waters. There is also a project focusing more on the Port Aransas, Texas area and the overlap of sea turtle nesting and mating habitats there. Our sort of timeline and roadmap, at least for the short-term project goals, are to develop a hub similar to Cetacean. We are working with federal partners to develop a secure GIS data store. Some of this data is sensitive and can't be released immediately, which Esri allows us several different options to kind of control who has access to this data and when they have access to it. We are identifying and acquiring population data sets actively right now, and we are working with independent researchers and groups to establish a workflow for contributing data, as there are some larger projects and smaller projects working with sea turtles, and we want to include all of them in the Sea Turtle Atlas. All right, and with that, I'm going to pass it off and introduce Clay George, who is our next speaker. While Clay, you can go ahead and start teeing up your slides. Clay is at the National Marine Fisheries Service as their large whale recovery coordinator, and he's going to be providing an update on Rice's whales conservation for us. Clay, you're still on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, all good.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, everyone. I'm excited to tell you a little bit today about the Rice's whale, a critically endangered species that's endemic to the Gulf of Mexico. Most of the work that I'm talking about today has been led by NOAA biologists at the Southeast Fisheries Science Center, with help from many of their partners, using funding from NOAA, Restore, BOEM, and other sources. So while the Rice's whale was only recently discovered or determined to be a unique species, they've been in the Gulf of Mexico for millions of years. There are whaling records of finback whales going back to the late 1700s that we now presume were Rice's whales, because Rice's whales are the only species of baleen whale that's resident in the Gulf. Scientists became aware of the whales in the mid-1900s from stranded specimens. And by the 1990s, NOAA biologists were spotting them with some regularity during stock assessment surveys, mostly in the DeSoto Canyon area off of northwest Florida. They assumed the whales were transient Brutus whales, which is a species of baleen whale that's found in temperate and tropical oceans worldwide. And ironically, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill led to the first targeted research on these whales. In 2014, genetics work confirmed that they were in fact a distinct lineage, and they became known for a bit as the Gulf of Mexico subspecies of the Brutus whale. But in 2021, a paper by Rosell et al. Showed that they were in fact a unique species due to their unique genetics, skull morphology, and geographic isolation from their closest relatives, a subspecies of Brutus whale from the Pacific called the Eden's whale. As a result, the Society for Marine Mammalogy declared them a distinct species in 2021 and renamed them the Rice's whale in honor of Dale Rice, the first scientist to write about them in the scientific literature. Distribution-wise, Rice's whales show a strong fidelity for waters along the coast, the continental slope and shelf break in the 100 to 400 meter depth range. Most sightings have occurred in the DeSoto Canyon area, but sightings and calls have also been confirmed offshore of Alabama, Louisiana, and Texas, also in this 1 to 400 meter depth range typically. Calls were recently detected in Mexico for the first time, which is consistent with spatial density modeling that shows areas of good habitat in the southern Gulf. As for their status, Rice's whales were listed as endangered in 2019. We suspect there could be as few as 100 whales remaining, and the population is probably declining. I say probably because we don't have sufficient funding to do regular targeted surveys in Rice's whale habitat. So there's considerable uncertainty in population estimates and trends. That said, they are one of the marine mammal species that was most impacted by the DWH spill, and recent surveys have found few calves and many animals in poor body condition. As you all know, many parts of the Gulf are highly industrialized, which places Rice's whales and their habitat at risk from many human activities, including vessel strikes, noise from vessels and seismic surveys, oil spills and other pollutants, ingestion of oceanic debris, and entanglement in fishing gear. Climate change could be an issue if impacts to Rice's whale prey or the whale's thermal tolerance starts to occur in the future. Most plans for aquaculture and renewable energy to date have been well inshore of the Rice's whale habitat, but these or other emerging threats could be an issue in the future without proper planning. Also, because the population is so small, they could also be at risk from natural factors like disease or inbreeding. So if the situation for Rice's whales is this tenuous, is there anything we can do about recovering them? Thankfully, yes. The first tool in our conservation toolbox is science and monitoring. Tagging and stable isotope studies have shown that the whales dive toward the seafloor during daylight hours, targeting small demersal high-energy fish like this silver rag driftfish. At night, they spend most of their time near the surface, where they are at higher risk of vessel strikes. Our understanding of the whale's distribution and range has also been supplemented with passive acoustic monitoring and spatial modeling. We are also looking into environmental DNA methods, which are proving useful for detecting other cryptic marine species. We're beginning to understand the demographics and population health of the species using methods like long-term photo identification, remote biopsy sampling, and drone photogrammetry. We're also monitoring threats using the Marine Mammal Stranding Network, risk modeling, and ambient noise monitoring. Despite these advances, there are still numerous gaps in our knowledge and understanding of the species, including population size, trends in demographics. We also don't know how many whales inhabit waters off of Louisiana, Texas, or Mexico, and if those animals are the same animals that we see in the DeSoto Canyon, or if they're different stocks altogether. The next tool in our conservation toolbox is policy and management. Thankfully, the Endangered Species Act and Marine Mammal Protection Act give us many tools to protect the whales and their habitat. We are in the process of designating critical habitat for the species, which will hopefully be finalized this month. The next step after that will be drafting a recovery plan, which will formalize the actions we need to undertake to recover the species. We are also working on 2 DWH restoration projects, one to reduce noise from vessels and seismic air guns, and another to reduce vessel strike risk. And we continue to administer the Stranding Network, which is staffed by responders from over a dozen organizations from Florida to Texas. Education and outreach is another critical tool for species recovery. In many ways, we're starting from square one with the species because most people don't even know that Rice's whales even exist. Our partners like Clearwater Marine Aquarium, Healthy Gulf, and Florida FWC are doing grassroots education and outreach to increase awareness and engage stakeholders, which is critical for building stewardship and getting buy-in for conservation. Meanwhile, NOAA and our agency partners are doing targeted outreach to marine resource users like the shipping and oil and gas industries. We're also reaching out to anglers and boaters who recreate in Rice's whale habitat. We want everyone who works and plays on the water to be on the lookout for this species. If you guys see any on your research out offshore, we certainly want you to get videos or photos within keeping a safe distance from the animals, of course, and report those sightings to 1-877 Whale Help. The final tool in our conservation toolbox is collaboration. NOAA can't recover Rice's whales on our own. We need to build relationships and partnerships with researchers industry, and others to share data, leverage our resources, and focus the science where it matters most. With that in mind, we especially want to build relationships with local Gulf Coast researchers and stakeholders. If Rice's whales are going to recover, a lot of work will have to happen at the local level in the Gulf of Mexico. So, in closing, Rice's whales are your whales, and they need your help. Recovering the species will require resources, and it will be challenging. We'll need to learn a lot more about the animals. We'll need to reduce threats from a wide array of human activities, and we'll need to engage a wide range of stakeholders to get support for conservation. All of this is possible if we work together and make Rice's whales a priority. We have the tools, we just have to use them. So with that, many thanks to GCOOS for giving me an opportunity to speak today and tell you a little bit about this species, and to our many federal, state, academic, non-governmental, and other conservation partners. And I'm happy to take questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Clay. That was a great presentation. And yes, we're going to have time for questions after our next presenter. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Kristen Hart from USGS. She is going to be doing a presentation for us on turtle telemetry.
Okay, thanks for presenting the slides, Megan. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Thanks for having me today to talk about turtle telemetry. I'm Kristen with USGS, and I'm in South Florida, but I'm a research ecologist. And I've probably spent the last maybe 20 years working on a lot of turtle telemetry, so I'm excited to talk about it today. Next slide. Sea turtles are, we consider them to have complex life history in that they're using sandy beaches for nesting, but then they go off to sea. And we don't really see them until they're in their 20s, well, 10s, 20s, 30s. It's many years, if not decades. A lot of the interesting behavior occurs offshore, sometimes well offshore, and we rarely see males. And so most of what we know about these individuals occurs from nesting beach studies or on the females that do come ashore to nest. Next slide. I have the luxury to work in both the water as well as on the beach in some of the areas here in South Florida. I do a lot of work in marine protected areas that are associated with national parks. So I work in Dry Tortugas National Park, and I'll show a bunch of slides from there because we have very clear water. But I also did work in Alabama during the whale spill. So these are some of the photos that show not only animals on the nesting beach at night, but also on boats and underwater. Next slide. I lead a large reptile research team that includes sea turtle species, but it also includes things like crocodiles and terrapins. So we're using a lot of different tools to get what these animals, not only where they're going, information on where they're going, but what they're doing there. So this is just a picture that reiterates the partnerships and teamwork that's necessary to do this type of work. There's also a lot of trust when you're jumping off that boat. Next slide. Some of the questions I get to address deal with very basic spatial ecology, but I feel like it really does integrate across multiple fields, including population ecology, conservation, behavioral ecology, and even quantitative ecology. So we're really, it's a very exciting time to be doing this, as well as an exciting time when a lot of the biologging tools are quickly developing because sensors are getting more sophisticated and batteries are getting smaller. Next slide. The research questions that I'm addressing are generally these 5, but what are the patterns of animal distribution? How do the observed patterns link to the key life history processes, such as reproduction? How do our oceanographic and environmental factors drive these processes? And how do humans and animals overlap with these individuals in space and time? And then I really do try to get into how we can apply this new knowledge to optimize different management solutions. We work really closely with park managers specifically. I use a mix of biologging tools. On the left, there's a little satellite tag followed by an accelerometer on that turtle number 5. The middle picture is a large male that has a satellite tag on him. I believe he's a GOMAPS turtle. And then on the right just shows where we're putting acoustic tags on animals. And that actually actually is from the Virgin Islands that I won't talk about too much today, but we've got a lot of acoustic data down there. And this isn't an approach different from many other taxa or researchers that work with other taxa, but it really is the way we can answer these questions. Next slide. I put this together just when I talked with Kim about talking about turtle telemetry to show this is an intern that we had on she's on our team now, but we were slogging away in the middle of the night to try to get these animals. We have to be where they are. So we get to work in these study sites that I list, but I also have really key collaborators and collaborations throughout the Gulf. I wanted to mention Donna Shaver, Meg Lamont, Kelly Sloan, and Dave Addison, and then Chris Sasso as partners throughout the last almost 20 years of work in the Gulf. Our primary objective together is usually to use spatial ecology and behavioral data to promote sustainable management of populations. Next slide. All the sea turtles, I don't know if I mentioned this, are imperiled, so this is definitely in the endangered species world. In 2021, I was able to put together a large part of my spatial data set, and the blue points are where I've tagged animals, and the dots are where sea turtles have gone. So consider that like their endpoint. If you're leaving a nesting beach, that's your foraging area. So we looked at what are the drivers of our realized tracking lengths in the marine turtles, and we put out our protocol on how we get this data. And this has been an instrumental data set. It really is sort of a career picture that I'm very proud of, but it does include a lot of information in the Gulf. So I wanted to highlight that. And this is out there and shareable as far as the foraging centroids. And we can certainly share additional data as needed. Next slide. I wanted to show a few examples of how we've used this type of data in a way that I didn't even think about it. And you'll notice that DeSoto Canyon comes up again here. We were working with NOAA colleagues who wanted to look at offshore aquaculture. And so all of my turtle data was shared in a layer by species to look at sort of risk and optimizing locations for that. Nick Farmer put that together. So this is one example. Next slide. And this is sort of a fun one I stuck in. I'm trying to make sense of this spaghetti map. Before I worked in the Tortugas, no one had really worked on sea turtles there other than grabbing some samples for very quick genetic analyses. And so since 2008, I've been running a project in that tiny little place, but we've really discovered quite a few connections, both internationally and across the Gulf. And this actually extends down to Nicaragua now and the Western Gulf. Next slide. The connectivity that I'm dealing with is mostly local in that we're here in South Florida. It's right in my backyard. We're dealing with Everglades National Park, Biscayne, Key West National Wildlife Refuge within the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, and then dry tortugas out towards the western area. And the next slide will show you locations of where these little turtles, if you can see them, those are endpoints of turtles that we've tracked through time. And we've been able to put this together in a few papers that show habitat use of, for example, green turtles that we've tagged in the dry tortugas, but we're really demonstrating long-term use of our local MPAs, which is a good thing for this species. And this picture has only grown and strengthened over the years. That area off Western Everglades, I'll speak about next. It's become a really interesting spot in 2 additional papers. I think if you just hit the next bar, one of the things about these highly mobile sea turtles, Megan, if you just hit they're actually local residents. And this is a flip of the mental status of a park manager when you're like, oh, these turtles just come and they're only here for a few months. Well, they actually live here. And so these are 2 additional pieces of scientific publications that we put together with our colleagues to show that this Florida Keys and Western Everglades actually is quite important. And maybe an expansion of, say, the Florida Keys sanctuary border could be necessary or considered if one were to expand those boundaries at some point. Next slide. These are just additional data layers that are available. We've worked with Donna Shaver a lot on spatial ecology of Kemp's Ridley, so we have looked at migratory corridors as well as where these animals are, and this was particularly important after the Deepwater Horizon spill. Next slide. And we've gone further to show where both species and even multiple different management units of these species occur. So again, hotspot mapping has become a large part of what I'm doing with the spatial data. Next slide. We have some BOEM-funded studies that, again, are, I won't go into too much about GOMAPS, but we were looking at these in particular for reasons BOEM is concerned about, and trying to figure out what these turtles are doing in the water column. And then next slide, we are part of that GOMAPS project. So we have the turtle side of it with Meg Lamont. We put together dive information on these animals. Next slide. And so we put a big, again, Gulf-wide, we had to integrate 136 dive tags to look at what time they were spending at the surface to integrate with the NOAA aerial surveys that were being conducted. So a lot of this is partnerships. The telemetry data is certainly not one thing I do on my own. Next slide. And we are definitely taking it into a predictive modeling approach where possible. I think that might be close to the next slide, but I can end there because I think I'm at time. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Kristen. All right, if anybody has any questions from any of the three presentations, you can either drop them in the chat or go ahead, turn on your microphone and ask them. I think I see one in the chat from Raphael. If you'd like to ask it over your mic, go ahead and feel free.
Hey, Megan. Yes, I was wondering if the either atlas that you mentioned in your talks are going to be linked to Gandalf. And I got a private response from Jerad, so I think it's best to share it with the team.
Yes, and thank you for asking that to highlight it. We definitely have plans to link to some of the data that we are coming out of the gliders in Gandalf. Right now it's not currently up there, but both environmental data as well as some larger plans to maybe get some acoustic data further in the future and include that on Cetacean. I also had a question for Kristen. A lot of the awesome data that you showed involves satellite tags. You briefly mentioned biologging data, and I wondered if you could expand on that.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. We are actually using acoustic tags in certain projects, but pop off accelerometer packages on these animals in order to get not only where they're going, so we can actually put two tags on I can put three tags on animals. One, which is the satellite tag, and then behind it, we glue a very small base plate to the turtle, and we attach a float within which sits an accelerometer, a radio tag, and an inline satellite tag. So when that pops off, we get the behavioral information that's logged on that turtle at that space and time. So it's what are they doing in the water column at that very fine scale. So that's been exciting. We're doing that in association with some BOEM and Army Corps colleagues. And so it's kind of this lots of data, pitch, yaw, and roll second by second for up to weeks at a time. And so you can tell if they're foraging, sitting, moving at the surface. It's been incredible. It's a window into what they're doing, unlike I've ever had.
Yeah, that sounds really fascinating and fantastic. And then I also had a question for Clay. You mentioned that less is known about Rice's whales off Texas and Louisiana, and I was wondering what, if any, plans there are to further investigate that area.
Yeah, great question. A lot of that is just because, you know, the work that was done in the DeSoto Canyon, that's where they found them initially, and that's where the targeted research has mostly been done to this point. But this past April, the Science Center did a series of aerial surveys off of the Galveston area, and also had a passive acoustic monitoring array out in that location. And they, in fact, found a couple Rice's whales during those surveys. And so the hope is, with some discretionary funds, that there will be another survey done this summer out there. And also Melissa Soldavilla and Lance Garrison from the Science Center put in for some restore grants to hopefully do more targeted research that will include areas off of Louisiana and or Texas.
Thank you. Jorge, you had a question?
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's very nice to meet you. I do have a question. Will you be able to provide any more details about the recent observations in Mexico for rice as well?
Yeah, so Melissa Sotavia published that information recently. So the results to date are there. It's is it Tamopas? Tell me, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, on the near the Veracruz area. I believe that is where they detected. They had 2 detectors just deeper than 400 meters, and that's where those detections were made. But that the hope is that passive acoustic monitoring devices can be expanded in Mexico if the restore funding comes through.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
And then we had a question for Kristen from Nick Shea. Is there a particular isotherm that turtles follow?
So it really isn't clear. When we have post-nesting females, they're optimizing their current use rather than a temperature. And we have very little tracking from foraging grounds back to nesting beaches for those females, because the tags that people put out generally don't last 2 to 3 years. So in rare instances where we do have a lot of migration data, it doesn't seem to be driven mostly by temperature. If that can answer it.
Thank you. And then a question for Clay from Laura Bowie. Is there an industry research effort for Rice's whale as well? If so, are these 2 research programs collaborating and coordinating?
Yes, I can't go into the details on it, but the restoration projects are being done with Deepwater NERDA funds. Elizabeth Featherston is working on those projects, and they do include engagement with industry, both the Gulf Quieting Project and Vessel Strike Project. Great question.
If anybody has any other questions, otherwise I will pass it back to Kim or Chris, who I believe is leading the next session.
Thank you, Megan and Jerad and Clay and Kristen. And I'm